Bloom where you're planted. Bloom where you're planted. This was said to me, and I read it also from one of my mentors, Saint Josemaria Escriva. And it really got me to think about where you are planted, bloom there. If you are in a season of dryness, bloom there. Gain the insights from there. If you're in a season of waiting, bloom there. Become your next best self in that time. If you're in a season of success, bloom there, and in fact, shine your light on other people. If you're in a season of decline, bloom there also, in the sense that ask yourself, what do I need to do to reinvent myself? You see, the idea of blooming where you're planted is a fascinating idea. I remember many years ago, I met some people who told me that when they hire a house and when they're renting a house, they just treat it like we're just passers-by, and so they wouldn't take good care of it. They wouldn't maintain it well. They're like, we're paying the rent anyway, But then I had the fortune and the good privilege of having friends who believed where you live, you should make it your sanctuary. And I must say, one of my best friends, really my husband, Morogami, when we got married and then moved into our first home together, I came from my parents' house, he had his place. And as I got married, we had looked for a place, and I was to move in after getting married, because I believe that that's the way we should do it. And I remember the excitement of being in a new home with the love of my life. And one of the things he told me is, we're going to take good care of this house as if we've bought it. And I thought, what an interesting perspective that is compared to my other friends, And I was like, this is when you start seeing what the influencers in your life can do to you, for you, against you. And we took care of that house. And I remember the house that really stood out for me is we stayed in some flats, apartments. And then finally, when we had our first child, we needed a small grass patch. So we prayed and looked and found a maisonette. And I remember when we walked into that maisonette, I remember telling our house assistant, this staircase was supposed to be light gray. No offense to those who are living in the house before, but I think we can restore it back to light gray, because right now it's tending towards a darker shade. And I remember us then cleaning the house regularly. This consistency really makes a difference. And we'd clean the house, and then I remember looking at the living area and thinking, we could paint it, maybe we could put wallpaper. And then we put wallpaper and just transformed the room. And then I learned you can actually just put a strip of wallpaper in a kitchen or in a bath area, and it changes, just separates the tiling and the painting. And we loved the space. It was small, it was cozy, and we brought up our children. And then it was time for us to leave, and we moved on into our home, which we built with a labor of love. Story for another day. And what stood out for me is, a couple of years later, a good friend of mine tells me, hey, we've moved into that house. We used to visit you guys. And I was like, okay, it's been about 3 years later? How are you enjoying it? They're like, gosh, Dr. Pat. In fact, then I wasn't even Dr. Pat. Pat, do you know the way we used to admire a house when we come? That same wallpaper, the way the walls are clean, the way that staircase shines. In Kiswahili, you say inangara. We are getting the benefit of what you did. And in fact, our landlady even told us, take care of this house like the Morogamis, and I'll never need to increase your rent. And the blessing, I remember telling our landlady, thank you so much for being so gracious and generous to us when we lived in that house. And I told her, we're now moving into our own home, and I pray that everyone who comes through this house, stays here, moves into their own home. And as a matter of fact, there was a lot of power in those words, because everyone who has stayed in that house has moved on to their own house, their own home. So what's the lesson? Bloom where you're planted. In the house that you're renting, take good care of it. Don't scratch the floor. Don't, worse still, unhinge the tiles so that you can use them for, I don't know what people use them for when they do that, or just generally not taking good care of the space you're in. It's a real manifestation of your personal brand. And at the same time, it's also a manifestation of how you take care of things in your private all the way to your public space. Where you're working, don't misuse that machine. I remember one time I was working in a space and then someone left. They resigned in a very unceremonious way. I don't know what kind of advice people are being given, subject for another conversation, around how to exit graciously and with grace, Anyway, she left and now we had to take up the machine. I was her team leader. So I'm looking at that machine and I'm like, is this a mat? Was she drinking tea on it, eating food on it? I was horrified because I'm like, 2 years and this machine has depreciated to a zero value because of how you've used it, banging it, dropping it, not dusting it, not cleaning it. What's that about? That's your tool of trade. And for as long as you're using it, it's actually manifesting who you are and how you take good care of things. Bloom where you're planted. Instead of complaining, oh my goodness, my job, so toxic, so tiring, so stressful. What can you do to improve the way you work and the conditions there? How can you show up as your next best self every day, no matter how stressful that is? Where you are operating, in whichever space, if you're serving in a specific space in the public domain, if you're part of a group, bloom where you're planted. You will thank your next best self because it's not so much what we achieve, what we have, but who we become in the process of those achievements and the experiences you have. May you bloom where you're planted this year and in this season. Thank you.